extermination, ethnic cleansing, genocide. Those are the words used to describe the crisis in Sudan. Not Bosnia, not Somalia, but Sudan. Sudan, the largest country in Africa, over 1/4 the size of the U.S. It lies south of Egypt, west of Ethiopia and the Red Sea, north of Uganda and Zaire, east of Chad, Libya, and the Central African Republic. The capital is Khartoum. For the past 12 years, Sudan has been fighting a vicious civil war, a war that pits the Arab North against the African South, an Islamic government against animist and Christian minorities, and Sudan against the whole world community. Torture, gang rape, slave trade, and massacres on the part of the government and the factionalized rebel movement have turned this country into a national hell and an international outcast. Signs that Sudan is also sponsoring terrorism outside its borders is earning the nation the anger and hatred of the world community. Last month, 5 of the 8 men arrested in the planned bombing of Manhattan's bridges and tunnels were found to be holding Sudanese passports. What should the response of the United States and the international community be to the turmoil in Sudan? We'll ask our guests. Suzan Mazur, a freelance journalist who has written about Sudan for The Economist and the New York newspaper, and Congressman Harry Johnston, Democrat of Florida, chairman of the African panel of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And we'll take your phone calls with your questions, or you can fax us your questions to 202-467-0601. I'll repeat that, 202-467-0601. That's a fax number. On the conditions in the Sudan, reportedly 1.5 million dead over the past 10 years, 4 million displaced, 60% malnutrition, 60% among children, 20,000 children gone or missing, presumed to have been kidnapped, sold into slavery by the government. You've been there, you've been there. When were you last there?
I was there in January, just after Sudan was condemned by the United Nations in a vote of 102-8 for human rights violations.
Last year there were gang rapes and forced impregnation, forced conversion to Islam, massacres, torture, executions. This sounds like the end of the earth. Is that what you found over there?
Yeah, John, I was there 2 weeks ago, and it literally is hell on earth there. I went into southern Sudan, visited some of the relief camps. When I was in Nairobi, I spoke to the rebel leaders here on both sides of the SPLA.
Well, Nairobi's in Kenya.
Yeah, but
in the north.
Yes, and this is where I had an opportunity to speak to the people who are fighting the north, both factions, which unfortunately themselves have created a lot of problems, and civil war among the factions that are fighting the north. These are Christians versus Christians, black versus black. And that is a serious problem. That I've been trying to resolve for the last 6 months, and it's still a serious problem.
We're going to go into that more in detail.
The situation is that there is no government in the Sudan. They're operating under a transitional constitution and have been ever since this regime took over. There's no independent judiciary. There's no parliament. There's no government. It is a complete shambles.
What does Amnesty International say about the situation there?
Pretty bad. Pretty bad, yeah.
Yes, they've been monitoring the situation ever since this regime has taken over, and they've talked all about the ghost houses there, the torture, the genocide of the Nuba Mountains, and it's the genocide of the Nuba Mountains, which is really one of the toughest things to deal with, because medical workers, press, they've not been allowed in. I mean, we just don't know the extent of the
What's the impact of the drought conditions over there, or the desertification, the movement of the desert out and the extension of the desert?
Well, I think the drought is over now, at least it is in southern Sudan. The problem, though, is there was no seed to replant. You can't get relief people in there. Those that were in there, some of them have been murdered. Just in the last couple of days, there has been new fighting in that area, and the government has sent troops down to the southern part of Sudan.
There is a problem with the desertification, and that is There's been, the people in the Nuba Mountains have been removed from their lands. And this is an area that was very agricultural. And so now, these people were small-scale farmers, and the land now has been sold to absentee landlords who, and these farms are now large-scale farms. And the farms are not really being properly maintained, and so it's creating a situation of desertification.
The United States has aid workers over there, correct?
Yes.
Were 2 of those aid workers killed?
Well, those were not U.S. aid workers. They were employed by aid workers, but they were UN affiliated, and they were murdered about a year ago.
Also, 1 relief worker for the European community was killed?
That's right, the EC.
Why were they killed?
It was, well, Hassan Turabi, the de facto leader of the Sudan, said that this government is perfectly justified in executing these people because they're allowed to have martial courts. Here's a man who has his doctorate in emergency law.
His name is Hassan Turabi, and he acts as what? The power behind the throne for who is the?
For Omar Bashir.
Bashir.
Who is a lieutenant general and officially is the president, the prime minister, and until recently the Minister of Information and Culture as well.
Well, we have 2 of the players. Who's John Garang?
John Garang is the leader of the SPLA.
What is that?
He's leader of one of the factions of the SPLA.
What is that?
The Sudan People's Liberation Army. There are 3 factions, however, at the moment.
Who is Majid Kamal?
He's the Iranian ambassador to Sudan, a very sort of shadowy figure. He had been the head of intelligence, I understand, in Lebanon some time ago.
Is the government of Sudan corrupt?
Oh, totally.
Totally.
It's a bogus government.
It's a bogus government. And there's a tie between Iran and Sudan, correct?
There is.
We're going to explore this when we come back with Representative Harry Johnson, Democrat from Florida, who's chairman of the African Panel on House Foreign Affairs, and Suzan Mazur, freelance journalist. We'll be right back. That clip shows a man who lost his hands when the government troops burned a church with the people inside. Did you discern anything else from the clip you saw, Susan? Did you see anything else in that clip that relates to this subject?
I don't quite understand.
Did you see where he said he was from?
From the Morrow Hills. This is where Hugo Diabre, a French filmmaker, the only journalist who's been able to get into the Nuba Mountains. He did a film on 16 millimeter.
That's what we just saw.
That's what we just saw. And he went into the Morrow Hills specifically because the homes there have a stone structure, unlike homes in other parts of this area which are made of straw. So there was evidence there that of the destruction of the homes because the stone base was left.
We have a live line out to London to a man by the name of Peter Vernet, who's the editor of the Sudan Update. Peter, can you hear me?
I can.
We thank you for getting up so early in the morning to share with us your thoughts on the internal politics and the nature of the war now going on in Sudan. When were you last there, and what is the situation?
Well, I worked there for 12 years up to 1989, to the coup when Bashir took over. And the situation has got a hell of a lot worse in the last 4 years since then. Since that time I've been editing Sudan Update and monitoring the situation.
What is the role of the Islamic Front in the Sudan?
Well, the Islamic Front is one of the best organized political groups in Sudan, but that's not to say that they're particularly popular. They lost out very badly in the elections in the middle 80s, and eventually took over by force in '89. They're not really supported by more than a few percent of the population.
The European community watches what's going on in Africa, does it not? And what role is it taking, if any, in the turmoil and the tragedy in Sudan?
Well, it's been trying to assist in the provision of aid, but I'm not aware that it's been having any success in trying to find a solution to the civil war that's been going on.
We have with us, Peter, Suzan Mazur is a freelance journalist and the chairman of the African panel on the House actually the House Foreign Affairs Committee. His name is Representative Harry Johnston, and I'm going to ask Congressman Johnston, do you want to put a question to Peter Vernet?
Well, yes. Specifically, should the United States put this country on the terrorist list? What would be his recommendation?
Well, it seems that the regime in Sudan has been used as a kind of experiment in promoting Islamic fundamentalism in Africa and the Middle East. In the question of the bombing or the bombing attempt in New York, I understand that people who were arrested carried Sudanese passports. It's not clear whether they were all Sudanese nationals, because this regime has been handing out Sudanese passports to...
Five of them were nationals. Five of them had passports, but those 5 were nationals, yes.
But I've spoken with people who are Sudanese who said that, and they've been trying to find out who these people are, and they don't seem to be able to get a handle on it. And it seems that they may not be really Sudanese nationals. They may just have been issued passports. And Peter, I think, has more information on this regarding the Iranian security. Yeah. Peter, do you want to discuss that, the Iranian link?
Well, a few things that I should mention. The Sudan government denies, of course, that Iran is pulling its strings, but at the same time, Sudan has been sending its military intelligence and security personnel to Tehran for training over the last few years, and it certainly has Iranian advisors in the country. I believe you may have some more information concerning the activities of the Iranian ambassador in Khartoum.
Yeah, when he arrived there, he brought with him the Revolutionary Guard, and they are now exporting Hezbollah and Hamas and all of them.
That an announcement was made by Omdurman Radio that the Iranian security was involved with the Sudanese security, and the Sudanese security who had this Iranian link were behind the issuing of passports to people like these 5 people who were involved in the aborted bombing.
Right. Peter, can you describe from your knowledge what Sudan's connection is to the planned bombing of New York City, the bridges and the tunnels of the UN? Do you think that was just a coincidence, or do you think that the government of Sudan is deliberately jerking our chain, or is Iran calling the shots, or what's the tie-in?
I think Sudan is a useful go-between. Sudan as a country has been a useful place for training terrorists in the last couple of years. These claims seem to be borne out, although it's been very hard to pinpoint evidence. What its role is in the bombing in New York, again, it seems to be that the regime is at least allowing things to happen. It's, of course, denying that it's directly involved itself.
Is there any tie-in that you're aware of between the Sudanese government and Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman?
Well, it certainly has its sympathies. It's been broadcasting sympathetic messages, and it sounds as if its own people are lined up in the same way. They've also been supporting terrorist action inside Egypt.
John, he came into the country with a Sudanese visa.
There's one angle that was reported in an Arab newspaper.
Hold on to that. We'll be right back. We have to take a break here. Hold on to that, Susan.